Okay, Mr. Sands.
Good evening. This is Monday, December 21st, 2020. I'd like to call the meeting of the Guilford Public Schools Board of Education Operations Committee meeting to order. We have a special meeting tonight that is joint with the Board of Finance. And of course, the topic is the budget for the next fiscal year. I think that the most expeditious way to proceed here would be to turn it over to Dr. Freeman and let him talk a little bit about the assumptions behind the preparation of the budget. And are we thinking that we're going to be back in school, or are we thinking we're still going to be battling COVID and some of those issues? And then we can kind of frame the larger picture of what's going to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Sands. I'm happy to do that. I miss being together with the fireplace over at the community center. I'm sorry that we're doing this tonight via Zoom, but I do want to start, and I'm happy to be able to start with some good news. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., I will be meeting along with Sonia and a number of other local shoreline health directors and superintendents to begin planning for vaccine distribution into the schools for school staff. The bottom line assumption for this budget is that with the vaccine rollout and the timeline that we are anticipating for that rollout into the spring and across the summer, we ultimately ended up building a budget that is being built around a return to our normal staffing levels. So the assumption that we're going into this budget with is that we do not need to carry over the additional unbudgeted positions that we are currently holding in place today. If you recall, we let you know that after the budget was finalized last year, opening under these current conditions, we have opened with increased teaching positions to bring down class sizes, particularly at the high school. We increased with additional people on board in the custodial area, nurses assistants throughout the schools, increased substitute rosters, daily sub rosters at the buildings. All of those were unbudgeted this year. We'll talk about those obviously when we come back and speak to the board about this year's budget. But the good news is that counting on this vaccine rollout, we are not taking all of those positions and building them into next year's budget request. So we're going back to the class sizes we were at in 2019. We're going back to the staffing levels that we were around at 2019. All of that being said, we do want the Board of Finance to know that we have also taken a very conservative approach to this budget as we build it. We recognize the impact that this pandemic has had financially on the entire town and all of the residents in the town. And while our budgets over the last few years have been conservative, this budget will likewise be conservative in nature. This is not a year that we are rolling out large initiatives. We're not looking to increase staffing. The theme around this budget is going to be getting back to school, to reestablish where we were, to make sure that we've lost no ground. We're not looking at significant increases as part of this budget moving forward. It's a year to return and rebuild on our strengths. And then there will be some new initiatives in this budget, and those initiatives will be built around the three focus areas that the board has identified for this year. The first is maintaining a safe and healthy environment. We think that we're beyond the most significant financial impacts of that. But while we return to normal class sizes, we hope a normal schedule and normal staffing next year, that may still be done behind masks. That may still be done with some additional precautions in place, but we don't expect that to be a significant investment. Additionally, we will be looking at the instruction around this year. We'll be looking at those elements of the distance instruction, the blended instruction that we actually may want to hold on to as we return to normal. We're going to look for what we can learn from this experience and what we can hold on to and continue to capitalize on moving forward into next year. But likewise, we don't expect that to be a significant investment. We will be looking to make sure that students did not lose ground. So we'll be continuing to look instructionally at ways to accelerate instruction. We will not be looking whole scale to remediation. We will be looking at accelerating instruction for all of our students to make sure that they have not lost any of that ground. And then the final initiative that the board identified this September was to continue to look at ways to improve our environment and our culture and our community and our instructional practices to ensure that our schools are places of equity and social justice. And so there will be some small investments in those areas as well this year. Again, none of those will be of the scale of full day kindergarten. We're talking about moderate investments built in a conservative budget request that will hopefully be going back to normal schedules, normal class sizes, and normal staffing levels as we reopen for next year. So we know that's broad. We know that you guys would like to see a bottom line, but at this point, we are just finalizing our administrative proposal. The Board of Education has not seen that bottom line yet. So within those broad strokes, we're certainly happy to have some conversation, but not share that bottom line with you just yet. And that's the operations budget. We're happy to talk a little bit about the capital budget requests as well, but thought we'd stop here and see if there were questions or conversation around the operating budget. Mike, you're muted.
There we go.
Yep.
I don't have anything right now. Maybe what we do is just go through both sides of it regarding
Sure.
operations and capital. I know that capital may come up tonight because the Standing Building Committee had actually looked at some projects last month, or actually this month at their last meeting in early December. So, and then we'll just listen to all of it, and then we'll put our questions together.
Great. So, we're happy to add the conversation around capital. The starting point and the good news around capital is not so broad as it was around the operating budget. Capital begins from a place where we know that a project that we intended to request last year got pushed off. And so capital begins needing to bring forward a request for the Lakes HVAC. We know that that is a project that is overdue. We intended to bring it forward in April for approval. We delayed it. We have been successful in keeping that system up and running, but we can't continue to tempt fate. We need to move that project forward. That is the single largest request we'll be making at about $2.9 million. Additionally, we have for years with the town been putting off a carpet replacement and a field refurbishment at the original turf field at the high school. At this time, we now have the track that surrounds that field that is failing as well. And so the Standing Building Committee has repeatedly taken a look at a bond that would it would refurbish the field, it would replace the carpet with the field, it would replace and it would refurbish or possibly replace the fill associated with that field, as well as tearing up and replacing the track completely, which is also a project which is well overdue. We'll include some additional other upgrades to things like the press box and access to that location. That is a bond request that is going to come in around 2.1 million. Again, it's one that we've put off, and it's one that we sort of go back and forth with about whether that should live on the school side or the town side, as fields are shared responsibility. So while we may end up carrying that as part of the school's bond request package, we'll certainly present that to the town as a combined request. That field gets as much park and rec use or community rental use as it does school use. Additionally, we've got two much smaller projects that were unanticipated that have forced their way up to the top of the necessity list. At Cox, we're going to have a bond request for a boiler replacement that's going to come in slightly over $400,000. That is one that we feel we cannot put off any longer. And at Melissa Jones, we're going to have an elevator project that's going to come in at slightly over $500,000. And again, we've got an elevator that is beginning to fail and is beyond its projected use, and it's no longer supported. Parts are no longer available for this particular model. We'd like to make that replacement before complete failure, as we experienced at Adams a couple of years ago. So while we've got an operating budget that is going to be conservative, we've got a bond request package that is likely going to come to you at slightly over $6 million. Cliff is continuing to work. We're continuing to try to revise some of those numbers. We do need to remember that nearly half of that is a bond that we intended to bring forward last year and could not because of the interruption to the voting cycle. So again, as we present it to the town, we'll make every effort to make that abundantly clear, but it does look like a large bonding request that will be accompanying our fairly conservative operational request.
Can you refresh my memory? Was Lakes the one that was taken off the table?
Yes, Lakes
Yes.
was the one that was taken off the table. We had to push through the Baldwin project because
Right.
it was already opened up and we were halfway through it.
Right.
But when we met with Matt Ritter and when we really looked at the language of the executive order, we acknowledged the need to pull back on the Lakes one. So, you know, we're putting together what might be a $6 million request. We're hoping to get it below that figure. But if it comes in at a $5.8 million request, nearly 3 million of it we had hoped to have approved last year and delayed. And so again, we'll try to make clear that it's not simply a standalone big request of 6 million. It's really 2 years worth of bonding because we had to delay half of that request and we need to ask for it now. They're all necessary projects. None of them are, I wouldn't describe any of them as unnecessary.
The impact of COVID on human beings, do you anticipate any major staffing changes for the new year?
Not major, no. Moderate. There will be some moderate movements. We will be looking to add a mental health position at the high school, and that is in response to some of the stressors that we've experienced. But instructionally, no, we do plan on sort of returning to regular staffing levels next year. We will be keeping a close eye on kindergartens. This year we had anticipated 12 kindergarten sections. We only enrolled 11. We anticipate that there were some families that had students who were of kindergarten age this year, but held them as a result of the pandemic. So while next year we're budgeting for 12, which is sort of the usual number, I wouldn't be surprised if we see 13 or 14 sections necessary to deal with sort of the students who were held this year and represent a bubble next year as we get a year's worth and then some enrolling next year.
Every year tuition comes up, and I know that where we stand right now, it appears that we were under, but we're approximating now and maybe turning a little bit, you know, where the tuition is the number, hopefully that you thought it was budget wise. When you're budgeting for next year, understanding that there's graphs in the chart that you do every year for the budgeting, any forecasting in terms of how you're going to budget for tuition yet, based on what
Yes.
you're seeing in the historical pattern?
Yeah, we are going to be budgeting for an increase in tuition, but it is a moderate increase. And again, as we look at real students in the system, we anticipate those students who will be graduating out versus the students who will be continuing with us with a slight contingency built in. This year, right now, as of this moment, we're forecasting that this year will be one of the first years in the last 6 or 7 that we come in on or under budget in tuition rather than over budget in tuition. So we will be building in an increase, but it's a modest increase. It's an increase of, you know, probably going to be in the ballpark of a 1% increase on tuition, not a 2, 3, or 4% increase around tuition. At this point, Linda and Mr. Scanziano, our director of pupil services, are both confident that that is a good figure. I will say that when the Board of Ed looks to make modifications to our administrative proposal, this is sometimes a place where they find us too conservative and ask us to build in more dollars. Mr. Gammerman usually encourages us to take a look in that direction, and there's a number of board members. So any numbers that I may hint at tonight, again, please remember that those are just in our administrative draft. The board may want us to be a little more cautious with that tuition number, but we're not looking at a huge increase this year. We're actually looking at a fairly positive year because of students we see who will be graduating out.
Paul, can you also
address the fact that in special ed, we have budgeted to cover the extra year that was incurred by state law.
Yeah, that is important. Thank you, Jason. So as a result of the pandemic, one of the changes that was made, the boards are aware that we are responsible for providing a free and appropriate public education to the residents of Guilford until they accept a diploma from us, or in cases of special education students, completing the school year in which they turn 21. And so that means that if a student turns 21 in October, we would be responsible for providing that student's services all through June of that school year. Because of the impact of the pandemic and some lobbying that took place, that has now been changed to 22. We're now responsible to carry students through their 22nd birthday, not their 21st birthday. And the budget for tuition that we have prepared is reflective of that. We've recognized that responsibility and built that in.
Is it counting on one hand how many are going to be aging out?
I don't have that figure at my I can't recall that right now for you. I'd probably be cautious about sharing it in a public session anyway. But yes,
understood.
Yeah, it's a small number of students who move out, but because some of these placements can be significant, that small number makes a significant impact.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you.
Yep.
Is an expectation that once things return to normal, that it'll go back down to 21, or do you think it's one of those changes that once it goes up to 22, it's going to remain there?
I think it's going to remain there. I think once we start providing that service, it'll be difficult to see that ever pulled back. Yep. I think it'll be at 22 from now moving forward.
What's the thought process behind that? I mean, why?
I think there was concern that students who were facing transitions out of public school support had that impacted by the end of last school year. Students who would have aged out at 21 and then had distance learning for those services from March all the way through the summer for those students. And so they added that additional year. I think it was put into, and now with this year as impacted as it is, and for some of our special education students, the services don't translate to distance supports maybe as well as they do for the general population of students, for typical peers. So I think that was the concern.
I can understand it, but to make it permanent, I don't necessarily understand that rationale.
Well, and I want to, again, that's a speculation on my point.
Yeah,
right,
but you're absolutely right. Once something is in place, it's very hard to take away.
But I'm not sure that folks in Hartford would refer to it the same way that I did, but I'm speculating when I say that I expect it will stay in place.
Yeah.
Other line items that usually are bigger, pension, insurance.
Medical insurance is going to be another positive for us. The town and the schools have continued to do very well. I know that Linda and Mary Jane met with Joe Spurgeon last week. Matt and I had a conversation about that. I think that the medical numbers are going to be positive, both in the town and in the school budgets. We're going to be budgeting a slight decrease in our medical spend rather than a significant increase. Remember, there have been years where we've seen medical insurance going up 8 or 9%. Last several years have been good years for budgeting and will continue to be this year. Pension, we do expect to see a slight increase in pension. The actuaries are continuing to work to make sure that we're making the contributions that will get us to fully funded. So it's one of my least favorite places to place money. It's one of the hardest places for me to see how it impacts the kids directly, but I realize it is it's a responsibility. We need to be funding that. And so we will be recognizing an increase in pension contribution this year. Not enough to have significant impact on the bottom line, but it is a point of place of increase. The biggest driver for us this year will again be salaries. So even though we're being conservative, even though we're going to be not adding all of these unfunded positions, my worry was that we'd be adding large numbers of unfunded positions if I thought that we'd be opening in this and that would have a huge impact. Even when we say that we're doing great in salaries, salary increases are always going to be our most significant driver, and that will be true this year as well. I will be speaking to that both as an efficiency and talking about what a great job we did holding that number, and then I'll also be identifying it as our single largest driver. We've got 600 employees, 85% of our budget goes to salaries and associated benefits. We work with 6 different bargaining units. We've got contractual obligations. That's just always a non-discretionary increase unless you're willing to make significant staffing reductions. I do want to say that while I'm talking about being conservative and not adding the unbudgeted numbers, this budget is not coming in with lots of reductions. And so should there be push from the community or from any boards in town to try to get to a 0 increase or get to a negative increase to be responsive to the fiscal needs of the community, that's when the board and I and the principals will begin talking about the impact of COVID and the fact that we can't start looking at saving monies by making dramatic reductions in school services. Our kids will be coming off a really complicated year, and we're not going to want, we're projecting class sizes to be static in Guilford, to be at what they were in Guilford. We're not looking to jump from 18 or 19 in an elementary school up to 24 or 25 in an elementary classroom to try to compensate for the financial impact by doubling down on the educational impact. So again, we're happy about where this leaves us. We're not going backwards. We're going to be holding our ground and reestablishing our position. We're not looking to go backwards in any of those educational services. We're not cutting coaches. We're not cutting supports to teachers. We're not increasing class sizes. We're looking to provide the same high quality service that we provided pre-pandemic, post-pandemic.
I have 2 questions. One is, has there been any discussion on the community feedback that we heard about additional art, especially at the elementary level? And then also my second question is the impact on transportation. What is the thinking of the board regarding buses and transportation in that line item?
So yes, there will be some conversation about art. The board held one public hearing prior to beginning work on the budget. We only had about 9 people who came out and spoke publicly, but of those 9, 3 spoke in favor of continuing to increase art at the elementary level. We will be making a proposal. We will be prepared to speak to that. But again, the elementary school day is finite, and we can't increase in one area without reducing in others, but we will be making a response. There were also families who spoke about support for swim teams. We'll speak to that. There were some individuals who came out asking for an additional administrative position for an equity officer, a full-time administrative position to take lead on issues of equity and systemic racism. There were also people who commented and said they don't want any additional dollars spent on conversations about racism or equity in the schools or social justice in the school systems. So we'll be responding to all of those. We are mid-contract with the bus company, and should we return to regular 5 days of schooling next year, we would be picking up with the existing bus company under the existing conditions of the contract. It's an increase, but it's not a big increase from one year to the next where we are in the middle of the contract.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say it's a 2-year contract?
No, we're in the middle of what I think is a 5-year contract.
5 year?
Is that accurate, Linda? Yep, we're somewhere in the middle years of a 5-year. I think we're in year 3 of a 5-year two. We're finishing year 2. Next year will be year 3 of a 5-year agreement with the bus company. So if we can get back to a full 5 days, this year the bus company has worked with us. We're running buses 4 days a week, not 5 days a week. So we have recognized some reductions, some savings in the contract, and the company has come to the table and worked with us on that. On the other hand, because of COVID restrictions for students on the buses, we have added monitors to the school buses. In the beginning of the year, we opened up with a monitor on almost every single bus. We have now reduced that. We now have monitors who are moving around, so there isn't a monitor on every bus every day, but that's an expense that we would hope not to have to continue to carry into next year.
Are you anticipating carrying any of these computer-driven cost increases into the new year?
I'm sorry, Mr. Gammerman, I got distracted by the waiting room for the meeting. Could you repeat that question?
Are you anticipating any increases in computer-assisted instruction based on the experiences we've had in this current year?
I would broadly say yes. I'm not exactly sure what that will look like, but I think that we have stumbled upon things with Zoom meetings and distance instruction, and the way that teachers have been able to record and archive lessons, that yes, there's been a lot of conversation about what we will do with the lessons learned during this pandemic once we are able to put this pandemic behind us. And so, yes, I think that you will see more use of the distance tools in the regular classrooms in ways to support students who require homebound instruction, in ways to support all the kids. There's a lot of talk about whether we'll go back to snow days or whether we will have virtual days during inclement weather. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like, Mr. Gammerman, but I'm sure that there will be an impact, and we will continue to see computer assisted, live streamed and distance instruction as part of our regular delivery model in the future.
Very quickly, if I could interject, Dr. Freeman, about the waiting room you were just talking about.
Yes.
That might have been Jonathan Trotta.
Okay.
In fact, communicating with him by text, he was having an issue getting in, and I know it comes up in some sort of what looks.
It wasn't in English. I was
It was
very
in- it was
nervous
in-
about allowing somebody in who wasn't using an English keyboard.
It
Yes.
happened last month, and yeah, I'm just letting you know, it happened last month, and I basically rejected it, and then he was not able to join the meeting except for a phone call.
So I've just done the same thing, and I owe Mr. Trotta an apology then.
He doesn't know why that happens, but I told him to change it, and he. All right, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I know. Yeah, he's saying he can't get in now. He's locked out.
Okay, so Kevin, if we see a phone number come in, let's make sure we allow the phone number in from the waiting room. But it did tell me that if I rejected that participant, they would not be able to get back in for the duration of the meeting.
Okay.
If Jonathan is able to use a different device, he may be able to get in, Mike, if he's able to try to, I don't know. I'm not sure if that'll work or not. I will reach
just
out to
let him know.
Mr. Trotta tomorrow and offer to give him an update individually.
You can have him try to get in now, and I can try to let him in if he does show up.
Thank you, Kevin.
You're able to override that?
Maybe. I'll take a look.
All right. All right. Well, I let him know. So, I did have a question, and then I was distracted. Anybody else? Before you gotta think about what I was going to ask.
Has there been any increase in the number of students this year? There's been, at least from my experience, a lot of families seeming to move into the area from New York and Westchester County. And I was wondering if any of that had translated into an increase in the student population, or if you're projecting that.
Not this year.
For next year.
In fact, this year the student population has decreased a little bit. We've had about 3 times the numbers of students in a normal year taking advantage of homeschooling. In many of those communications, the parents let us know that it would likely be for the duration of the pandemic, but not longer. We have had new students arrive in the community, but not enough to offset students who have withdrawn for private school or homeschooling, or like I said, the hold on the kindergarten. I know that every year that we present an enrollment number, we qualify it. I'm going to suggest that this year's number is going to just be harder to predict than any other number. I do anticipate some, if not most of those students in homeschooling situations to return. I do expect to see some inflation in the kindergarten numbers. And then if we get back to baseline, then there may be some increase due to the number of students who haven't relocated to Guilford or moved from other communities. Not significant. I don't think that it's going to be enough to change staffing numbers, but I do think that we'll see some impact. The only place I think it may have an impact on staffing numbers would be kindergarten. And it wouldn't be unusual for us to add a kindergarten section in August. And in fact, there was 1 year, 3 or 4 years ago, where we did add 2 kindergarten sections in August because those numbers are so volatile. They just move. This year we held a kindergarten section. We had one that was budgeted for that we didn't fill because the numbers were low this year.
Thanks.
I recalled my 2 questions. I think, by the way, I think Jonathan's on now. Jonathan, are you on?
I do see a phone caller. Yep.
Yes, I am the mysterious Japanese meeting participant.
I apologize, Mr. Trotta. I hung up on you. That was my error. I apologize.
All right.
No,
we
no
both did it.
problem. My daughter used the tablet to attend Japanese school, so that's why there's a Japanese name.
That makes all the sense in the world.
All right. That explains it. Well, now I know better. You won't be, you'll be in tonight.
Yeah.
I remember the 2 questions. One was going back to the budget hearings that were in October. There was a couple of people also regarding the swim team. I don't believe you addressed that. I know we talked about art, but I know swim was there too for the boys swim team as an item.
Yep, we will be making a proposal around swimming. I will also be offering some context. I will be reminding the board and the community that while swim does have a pay-for-play component this year, it is not the only program that we offer that has a pay-for-play component. Ice hockey has a parent contribution, a family contribution. Crew has a significant family contribution. And there's a number of our sports where boosters clubs and volunteerism staff the assistant principal positions. So we will be making a proposal around swim, but we'll also be, reminding the community of the context. We are not a pay-for-play system. We don't have any individual program that is completely funded by parents, but we have a number of sports, and it has to do with the way that new offerings came into our catalog of offerings. But we have a number of offerings that are not fully funded by the Board of Education. And again, off the top of my head, swim, ice hockey, and crew may be some of the most expensive programs for children to participate in for the families. But there are other programs that have elements of that as well. And we will have a proposal around swimming, but we'll also be reminding the community of that context.
Okay. The other question was about summer programming and budgeting for the summer. Do you foresee, I mean, obviously we're turning a corner as we're all, seeing, but we still have many months to go. Do you see summer programming affecting the budget at all?
I do, but I also think it might be one of the first areas where we see a response to Mr. Gammerman's question. So I do think that we will be able to provide in-person extended school year services to a greater degree than we did last year. Last year, we were coming off of the full closing and we were continuing to be nervous about having students in the schools. This year, we've had schools open and the experience is showing us that schools may be some of the safest places that students spend their time. We're not tracking spread of the virus in our schools. So I do think that we'll be able to offer in-person extended school year services as we have traditionally. On the other hand, what we learned last year is that by offering distance summer programming last year, we about quadrupled the number of students who took advantage of that. And we were able to do it at an efficiency because we weren't paying for transportation and teachers were able to take advantage of the distance platform. So I think this year, whether we need to or not because of the virus, you will see a hybrid summer where there may be offerings that are in person for the students who most need that in-person instruction. And we may have virtual offerings for students who want to take advantage of those opportunities. And we'll be able to do that in a way that is cost effective and can reach a larger number of students than we would normally touch in the summertime.
Thank you.
We have budgeted for in-person summer school. That cost of that is built into this
Already
budget
in,
that you'll see.
right.
Yep.
So Dr. Freeman, I missed the beginning. I apologize, but maybe you could tell me how much you think the budget will decrease this year.
So, Jonathan, I started by pointing out that the board and I are very aware of the financial impact that the pandemic has had on the community, and the draft that I will be bringing to the Board of Education may be one of the most conservative drafts that has ever left my desk before it landed in the hands of the Board of Education. I also took some time to point out that while we are acutely aware of the impact, the financial impact that the pandemic has had, we're also really aware of the impact that this pandemic has had on student learning. And while we do anticipate returning to normal staffing levels next year, I do not expect to be proposing reductions to our budget. I don't expect to be removing coaches or other supports for teachers. I don't expect to be suggesting increased class sizes to try to move in a negative direction. I really want to make sure that we strike a balance between recognizing that our students will be coming off the most unique and I'm sure the most interrupted school experience that they have ever had. And we're going to have to be aware of that. In fact, I did note briefly that we will likely be increasing, at least in small numbers, some of our mental health positions because kids are going to be coming back to school needing supports and needing teacher attention. So it's going to be responsive to the fiscal environment, Jonathan, but I don't anticipate saying that we need to begin dismantling the school services to be responsive to the financial situation. I think that one's as important as the other, and we need to find the responsible balance between the two.
Okay, you know, I asked this question not completely in humor, but to point out that hopefully someday we'll have a decrease. But what do you think the increase might be at this point?
Well, so I have not shared my draft with the Board of Education yet. We are finalizing those numbers this week, and we'll begin working on our presentation materials. We'll present that to the Board of Education on January 11th. You'll receive the materials on the same day that the board does. So while I'm comfortable, Jonathan, saying it'll be one of the most conservative initial drafts we've ever brought forward, I don't want to quote a specific number tonight, and don't believe I ever have. I don't think we've ever shared a number with you guys in the rocking chairs in front of the fireplace.
No, usually not.
Okay. I guess the other question would be, and I think you touched on this after I joined, that people are starting to get a little more comfortable with the kids being on campus. Is there any kind of like survey or feedback you're getting that, you know, there was a lot of fear out there, and now that we're starting to understand this thing, I'm wondering, is the public sort of coming around and saying, yeah, it looks like it is okay for the kids to go to school? And
I think the first measure we have of that is parental choice. So, you know, remember that in this current setting, we have our schools open to large degree. In grades K through 6, the schools are open for in-person learning for all of the student population 4 days a week. Wednesday remains a fully distanced day. At grades 7 through 12, we are open 2 days a week for half of the population on each day. So half of the kids come in on Monday, Tuesday, and the other half of the students are in school on Thursday, Friday. Again, Wednesday is a full distance day, and when the students aren't in school, they're supported through the computer virtual distance learning platform. All of that being said, when we opened the school doors, we had about 9% of our population that chose not to attend in person at all, but to request full distance learning support. As the school year has progressed and as we have seen numbers increase nationally, locally, right here in Guilford, and we've seen student cases increase in our schools as well. At this point, we're up to about 13% of the population that is choosing not to attend at all, but to receive their instruction in a fully distanced platform. I am aware of other school districts in the state of Connecticut that are experiencing 30 and even 40% of the student population that has selected full distance learning. So more than any other survey, it's the fact that 87% of our kids are coming into the schools for the in-person experience that tells me that parents and the community are confident in what we're providing in the schools around health and safety measures. The other thing that I will tell you is at this point, we've identified about 47 positive cases within the student body. In none of those cases do we believe that the initial positive that we identified resulted in another infection in the schools. So when we become aware of a case, when we become aware of a positive case, and we become aware early, because in almost every case, parents are calling us immediately. In most cases, we know before the student receives the positive test back that the parent suspects a positive test. As soon as we realize that we've got a positive case, we work collaboratively with the town health office, the public health office, with the fire department. Contact tracing is completed. We identify who may have been in proximity to that positive case. We have placed entire classrooms and grade levels under quarantine when we felt that that was necessary. And in none of those cases have we found a second student in that cohort subsequently becoming positive. We believe that because of the way we quickly respond, in addition to the protocols that we have in place in the schools, the strict cohorting at the younger grades, the hybridization at the older grades, the plastic dividers that we have in place, the distance that we attempt to maintain, and most importantly, the really strict masking protocols that we follow. We are very strict in mask requirements for students and adults in the buildings, and we just don't see a single instance where we think that a student who came to school positive gave it to any other individual in any of our buildings. And in almost every case, contact tracing leads us to be confident that the initial infection is not happening in our schools. It's coming from family gatherings, outside activities, parent work settings that bring it home into the home. We're very confident that we are not spreading the virus in our schools. We think we are controlling that environment. If you think about it, it may be one of the most controlled environments that our kids spend any time. We've got teachers reminding them constantly to keep their masks on. Mask breaks and lunch periods are very controlled. We've reduced class sizes. We have put in plexiglass dividers. And again, we're really strict about the mask protocol. And so we think it's one of the safest places our kids spend time.
Sounds like the hard work is paying off and you're having some reasonably good experience. Are you having any issues with some of the maybe more vulnerable teachers, like our elderly teachers, or maybe someone who has some comorbidities that might bring up their risk level?
So not just teachers, but all of our employees. We've worked with all of our different bargaining groups. We entered into memorandums of agreement with all of them. Jason Bowden is working very closely with our labor attorney and with the state and with all of those bargaining groups. Essentially, Jason is talking to and meeting with employees all day, every day. There's a lot of options for how to respond to that. There's a lot of individual decision points that need to be addressed. And so, yes, we're working with our staff. We have held multiple faculty meetings, some of them by Zoom at 7 o'clock at night, to talk about the decisions that are being made around that. The HR office is working long days and working fast to keep up with all of that. We're doing everything that we can to support our staff members, make sure that they feel safe, make sure that they're getting all of the additional benefits that have been made available to employees during this pandemic, but also keeping schools open. We do not have work from home options for our teaching staff unless or until it becomes required. We have had classrooms, whole grade levels, whole teams at the middle school level that have been placed under quarantine. So when a third grade class needs to be placed under quarantine because there was a student who came to school positive, then that teacher continues working from home remotely. So while we have placed teachers and staff members into quarantine, in almost all of those cases, our employees have continued working and supporting the students through a platform just like this from home during that time.
Well, I'll tell you, my hat is off to you and the entire school system for this tough, challenging year, and keeping the school open and working through it in such a positive way.
Well, I know it's hokey, but I honestly believe that the teachers have been heroes through all of this. The teachers, the principals, the nursing staff, and all of our support positions, food service, clerical, security, custodial. Our team has stepped up this year, and they've really gone the extra mile for the kids. I appreciate you saying that, Jonathan.
It's well deserved, sir.
Does anybody have anything else from the Board of Finance?
Just one question.
Okay.
Since it's still an open issue as to when the children will be returning to school physically, do you have any contingency plans in the works for reopening 5 days a week at any point before the end of the current school year?
Yes, we could move to 5 days a week as soon as the numbers and the local health officials feel that that's the right thing to do. So when we opened the school this year, we really opened on sort of this continuum. We knew that we would be ready to support all of our students in school 5 days a week, and we knew that we'd be ready to support all of our students at home virtually 5 days a week if necessary. And we have been moving back and forth up and down that continuum. The other thing that we have refined since the opening of the school is the compartmentalization that we can do on that continuum. We don't have all of the schools in the same place on that continuum on any given day. We've had whole schools that had to close for 4 days around the Thanksgiving holiday because of the staffing impact. So while one school was fully virtual, all of the elementary schools were open 4 days a week for all of their students for full in-person instruction. And then the high school was still open just 2 days a week on the hybrid model. So we had 3 different conditions happening on that continuum on 4 days that bookended the Thanksgiving holiday. I do anticipate as we come back from this holiday break and continue to move forward, my understanding is that winter is going to continue to be challenging. We're going to continue to see community spread. We're going to continue to see increasing numbers before the vaccine has a positive effect. What we're learning, for all the positive things that I said about safety and health within the schools, what we are learning is that when we have multiple positives in a school community, whether students or staff members, to be safe and then responding and placing bubbles around those people with quarantine taxes staffing. And I do anticipate that we will see schools, before we can move to fully open 5 days, Mr. Gemmerman, I think we're going to see more schools that have to go to fully distance because of the impact we're having on staffing. Mr. Bowden's office is signing up new substitutes every day, and we cannot keep up with the demand when we have positive identifications in the school community. One positive could put 20, 30, 50 students into quarantine, and it could affect half a dozen or more staff members, and that makes staffing the building really challenging. We go to distance learning, and now those staff members can be quarantining and still working and teaching from home, and that addresses the concern. So I think we'll continue to see that happening through the winter months before we start seeing large scale and impactful rollout of the vaccines. If I'm wrong, and if the numbers go in a positive direction, we're ready to reopen more fully at a moment's notice. I just anticipate that things are going to get more challenging before they start to get better.
Dr. Freeman, I got another question. I may get this information confused. I thought I saw some kind of, it may have been a news source that was talking about quarantine dropping from 14 days to 10. Is that something that was discussed in Connecticut, actually? I'm not even sure.
Yes. So the CDC has changed their requirements about quarantining. So quarantining, as it used to be that if you were exposed to somebody who was positive, that you would have to put yourself through a 14-day quarantine. There are now 2 other versions of that. If you're exposed to somebody who's positive, there is a 10-day quarantine, and I believe there's a 7-day quarantine with a negative test option. The state of Connecticut is just now beginning to issue guidance about how they would expect local health districts and school systems to respond to that. Sonia sent some communications today. We will be talking with our local health officials today about how we intend to respond to that. I believe the idea is that a 10-day quarantine would be less impactful, and therefore more people would honestly and effectively endure the full quarantine rather than being given a 14-day quarantine, which you cheat on. The impact to the schools is less because we enforce that quarantine from the school side. If a student has been placed on a 14-day quarantine, there's no way for us to know if they're quarantining thoroughly at home and outside of the home, but we do make sure that the students do not report for class during those 14 days. And so we'll be talking with Sonia in the town office and determining what that looks like locally. That was a roundabout answer, Jonathan. Yes, the change happened. Connecticut just caught up with it this week, and we don't know exactly what we're going to do with it locally here in Guilford until we talk with our local health official.
Okay, I mean, maybe that makes it easier for students in the school alike.
It could help staffing because it would get us our teachers back sooner. 10 days is better than 14 days if we're losing a number of staff members. And so we'll have those conversations and see. And I think there's a difference between the simple medical evaluation of that and the public health evaluation of that, right? You could certainly say it's safer to maintain the 14 days, but from a public health perspective, 10 days is more likely to get more people following the guidance. And it would be better for staffing. So we'll keep you apprised. We'll let you know after we have the conversations. It's moot right now until we come back from this winter break anyway. If we had to inform a student or a staff member tomorrow, it wouldn't make a difference if it was 10 or 14 days. We'll have to have a decision moving forward when we open the schools on January 4.
Okay, yep, thank you.
We're at about that point where if we were in the community center in the fireplace room, that we would start to pack up our stuff and move upstairs to our Board of Finance regular meeting. I don't know if anybody has anything else. The one thing I was just going to say is that, you know, Dr. Freeman, for the past few years, you always say this is not a status quo budget, right? And in fact, when anyone says that, I know the veins sometimes pop up on your head because no budget should be status quo. I mean, we want to improve the students at all times. It does sound, though, that this year coming around, not that it's status quo, but there is more of a maintenance of what has been going right and maintaining the health and maintaining the instruction, and if not improving it based on the different the virtual instruction that's been going on in the hybrid. And so it does seem like maybe this one is going to be the closest to that, but I have a feeling that you and the administration and the staff will make sure that it's not status quo, even though it'll be conservative, as you say.
I think it's either going to be the most boring budget we've ever put forward, or it's going to be the most hopeful budget we've ever put forward, because it's going to be about getting back to where we were. And depending on how you look at that, that can be looked at as boring and status quo, or that can be looked at as the happiest, brightest moment that we will have seen in what's going to be something like 18 or 20 months by the time we get to it. So I'm going to view it as the most hopeful budget we've ever put forward, even though it may not be the most the most exciting and the most cutting edge. It will be the most hopeful budget that we've ever put forward.
What should we anticipate from you prior to the next meeting that we have in January?
You will be receiving your budget book on or around January 11th with the Board of Education, which will have all of the detail to go along with this. And then we have a meeting where we will be presenting, again, sort of this administrative draft to you, and we'll talk about what we've built into it. And I know at that time that Dr. Balistraci may be able to at least begin hinting at what amendments or changes that the Board of Ed will be considering. But I believe we bring it to you before we hear from the community. So, there'll be more opportunities for dialogue before the board gets to a final approved budget with all of you.
So we'll get it in about 10 days before the next meeting.
Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, about that.
Good.
Actually be the 19th, our next meeting. So 11th will be right around there.
Yeah.
So
Yep,
we'll have plenty of time.
you'll get it about a week before we sit down and talk it through with all of you guys.
And I'm sure if Mr. Sands doesn't mention it, the next meeting that we have is the night of our regular meeting as well, on the, what did I just say, the 19th at 6 o'clock, because we have a little bit more time to discuss what's been presented.
Right. There's more detail to talk about in the next meeting.
Right. Great. Unless we have anything else, I think we're all set. I can't thank you enough, as always, on behalf of all of us. We love this discussion.
Well, and we just want to say, not specifically about tonight, although it includes tonight, we just want to thank you again for all your support. I work with a lot of people around the state who are trying to manage all the challenges of this pandemic and also feeling like the town is just, micromanaging and breathing down their necks over every dime. And I have to say that in Guilford, the sense that we get is that there is support for the decisions we have to make, that people recognize that the kids need to have safe and healthy schools, that school is important, and we don't feel that we are doing wrong by making sure that we're providing those opportunities for our kids. And so that support is felt, it is recognized, and it is very much appreciated by us on behalf of the kids. Thank you for that. It means a lot.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if that wraps up the business of the meeting, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Amy, can we have a second?
I saw Dr. Hirsch second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned as of 7:27. Thank you.
Happy
Thanks, everyone.
holidays all.